South Africa, and the future of the ANC, next on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs at UWM and Milwaukee Public Television present International Focus, a global magazine linking Wisconsin and the world.
Welcome to International Focus. I'm Doug Savage, Assistant Director of the Institute of World Affairs at UWM. In a contentious internal struggle, leaders of South Africa's African National Congress Party recently sacked President Thabo Mbeki, installing ANC loyalist Glemo Motlate as caretaker president. Party leader Jacob Zuma is positioned to assume the post after elections are held next year. As the succession struggle plays out, critics worry that after 14 years in power, the ANC leadership has begun to see the interests of the party and the nation as one and the same. To help us examine the post-apartheid history of the ANC and what may lie ahead for the party and the nation, we're joined in the studio by two native South Africans. Jacques du Plesis, Assistant Professor in UWM School of Information Studies, and Mokwining Nhlapo, Deputy Director General of South Africa's National Commission on Information Society. He is currently on sabbatical leave from his position in Pretoria, where he conducts research in the U.S. Well, welcome both of you to International Focus. Mokwining, maybe we can start with you. I think people have some sense in this country of the ANC as the leadership in South Africa, but perhaps not a good sense of the history. Certainly the movement started long before they were the governing power. Maybe you could walk us through that history a bit.
Thanks, Doug. Just briefly, the ANC is the oldest liberation movement in Africa, established in 1912, and was banned by the apartheid government around 1960, and was unbanned in 1990. It took over government in 1994 and has been the ruling party since 1994 in the new dispensation. Briefly, that is the ANC, the history of the ANC in brief.
Mm-hmm. And Jacques, you could perhaps walk us through a bit of the history of the governing period. First president was, of course, Nelson Mandela.
I think if we look back at Nelson Mandela's, I think most of us look back to a surprise and to a miracle. Nelson Mandela had the wonderful facility to reach to all population groups in the country, and everybody felt truly he was our president. That was not expected because of the political tensions that led up to the elections, and so that was remarkable that happened. And Mokwining and myself have been talking in the last few days about this, and we both agree that today there's a very relaxed atmosphere, and the struggles and the suspicions and so forth that was there is really subsiding significantly. And so people feel themselves more South African, and there's more of a bond amongst the different groups today.
Give us a sense, if you could, of what that period was like when the ANC took power across the spectrum of South African society. I mean, certain apprehension in some quarters, I would think.
Well, relating to an African analogy, it's like being dropped in a game reserve at midnight. You don't know what's around, and you don't know. You're very unnerved. Some big animal might be coming at you, and so it takes for daylight to come to really understand where you are and if you are in danger or not. And I think there was great uncertainty in all sides. I think from the black side there was a fear of a backlash from the white community, and of course many whites feared for the worst, that they wouldn't be welcome in the country anymore and so forth. And but most people stayed cool-headed, and eventually wisdom prevailed.
There was a feeling of suspicion, as one would expect. There has been policies of discrimination where you'd find that people lived, one, in terms of ethnic groups, different homeland systems, race divided across racial lines. So there was a deep sense of suspicion. But when that new South Africa dawned, it started to bring people together to say we all live in this new country that we have to build together.
And what was Thabo Mbeki's position in those early days of the ANC government?
In the early days, I must say that the role of the former president, Thabo Mbeki, was a major role, even at that stage, because the role that President Mandela played at that time was the role of reconciling the nation. And on the other hand, the role of President Mbeki, then who was the deputy president, one of the deputy president, was to get the state machinery working. Firstly, you had a government that only focused on one race in terms of service delivery and what government provided. Now you had to then get the machinery to look at the whole population, and there was a backlog under service in terms of the majority of the people. So his role, even at that stage, as early as '94, it was clearly to set up a government machinery that will deliver quality service to the majority of the people.
I would think that was quite an undertaking, because as you pointed out, essentially the previous government had focused on security for one segment of the population and not a great deal of service delivery for others. So, so Nelson Mandela retires, leaves the scene, and President Mbeki takes power. Jacques, perhaps you could give us some sense of the early days of his administration.
I think maybe focusing on AIDS, during Mandela's administration, that was not a core focus because of so much that had to be done. And I think there wasn't a clear idea of the impact that this would have in the future. That's one of the first things that Mbeki had to face, was the AIDS crisis, and of course that's one thing where people felt he did not address it well. He did not agree with experts in the field about the virus and the cause of AIDS and so forth. And so, unfortunately, that area did not go well, and his Minister of Health did not contribute to solving the problem either. ARV rollouts was slow. As I did research through the country, I asked, after it was announced that it was available throughout the country, you found out it was a very spotty availability and difficult to come by. So people needed treatment, couldn't get it. I think that was a sad thing. But on the positive side, I think he's also Mbeki is a very pragmatic leader. As far as the economy goes, he did very well. The country has maintained a very solid growth, and I think under his leadership we look back at a prosperous economy that definitely had some solid growth.
Mokwining, how would you characterize his administration?
I would say that while President Mandela's government focused on nation building and reconciliation, I think President Mbeki's almost decade as the head of state was more on, as Jacques said, building the economy and really dealing with transformation issues. There were lots of imbalances that had to be addressed, and I guess he did well because the backlog was a backlog of many years. He managed to build a very stable economy, which had a growth rate of around 4% for the last 4 or 5 years. Secondly, it was also to reunite South Africa to the nations of the world. And if you look at the role that he played in terms of putting Africa on the international agenda, and also ensuring that there is stability on the continent, because for many years Africa has been known for unstable government, undemocratic government, but with the new Program for Africa's Development, NEPAD, which was his brainchild with President Wade. He managed to ensure that there was a vision that the whole continent can work towards. So I would say that those were the two main achievements: building a strong economy and ensuring that issues of transformations are addressed, but also putting South Africa on an international map.
And Jacques, during the same period, what was the role of the ANC as a party within South African society?
You know, that's a very important question. Now, interesting difference is Mokwining is intimately familiar with the inside of the ANC. You know, as an ANC member, he meets many of the inside people. He's very productive and active inside the party and so forth, and in government. So he can provide you a good inside perspective. I come from a completely different perspective. I live in the States. I visit the country frequently. This year I've been there 3 times. And so I've got and I speak with many officials as I visit there, but it's definitely an outside perspective. And so it's interesting to see that difference. As I visited throughout the country, I noticed, for example, going to the city council offices, that you see it's also the party headquarters, and the ANC name is everywhere in the building. And the ANC has got some you know, offices where they help people retrain, but it's actually government retraining of people. But so sometimes I looked at this and I said, I'm very supportive of what's happening here as far as retraining and so forth and people getting skilled, but there's a definite blur here between what is the party and what is the government here. It's obviously government offices and government money, but the party carries the logo. And I think it sounds like I'm critical about it, but I'm not necessarily critical, because I think there's an interesting insight that I gained in one of the trips when I took some UWM students down there. One of my students asked a person at a orphanage, so is the economy better? The person said, no, not really. Do you have more jobs? No, and so forth. And he found out that, well, things are not necessarily better all round from what things were before. I said, well, in that case, how come you still vote for the ANC? And the person corrected him. He said, I think I can explain that to you. If your father abuses liquor, are you happy? And he said, no. He said, is he still your father? He said, yes. He said, I think you understand. And so within the ANC, and I think that's not a unique thing, we have great loyalty, you know, many people have great loyalty to a political party that they follow. I find with the ANC there's a die-hard loyalty to the party as the Liberation Party and the father of the country. It really embodies more than a political party. And so that loyalty goes beyond just mere looking at the party as a service provider. If you don't do well, we'll switch our allegiance to somebody else. It has to happen within the party. And so I think much of what we see today is kind of like the ANC itself contains South Africa politically, and that's why you find so many interesting factions in the party. It's not uniform. You find COSATU, the Communist Party, you know, and the ANC combining in a political structure. And
well, we're going to pick up on some of those factions within the party when we come back. Right now we're going to take a break on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus. We're talking about the ANC and South Africa. Well, Mokwining, before we went on break, we touched a little bit upon the various constituencies within the broad umbrella of the ANC. Perhaps you could give us a little sense of who the different factions might be.
Well, I wouldn't call them factions, but yes, there are different groupings, if you like, or ideologies that dominate within the ANC, because the ANC is a broad church, as it's called. There are within the ANC communists, mainly from the South African Communist Party. There are workerists who are unionists coming from the COSATU, which is the Congress of South African Trade Unions. And there are national democrats within the ANC. But all of them within the ANC are under the constitution of the movement, which is a national democratic organization. The ANC has had this alliance with the South African Communist Party and the Congress of South African Trade Unions way back during the time of the struggle. On the one hand, you had workers who at shop floor level at work had to organize themselves, and this was one terrain of the struggle where you had to first look at workers' rights being protected, but in doing that, then you are advancing the aims of the struggle. But you also had, during the Cold War, as you would know, the two ideologies where you have the Soviet. And during those days, the ANC had a lot of support that it got from the Soviet Union at the time. So all the people are in the ANC, and they have their own agendas. But the constitution of the ANC, it is very clear that is to build a democratic, national democratic society in South Africa, and that is what brings everyone together.
And I'll leave this to either one of you to respond. What brought us to the current situation, which resulted in the end of President Mbeki's term?
I think the termination of President Mbeki's term can be traced back to the ANC National Conference last year in December, where President Mbeki stood for a third term as the president of the ANC and lost. And President Zuma won the election as the president of the party. But because South Africa, as a constitutional democracy, it's got a system of government that is different from the US, where you would find that it's a Westminster system. And it just happened, I think it was last year in the UK, where Prime Minister Tony Blair had to step down, and the current Prime Minister took over. So what happened was that following the conference in December, where President Mbeki lost, there were discussions within the party in terms of how do you prepare for the ANC when it takes over. But also the discussions tended to be looking also at some of the challenges that were within the organization in terms of the change of guard, in terms of taking out President Mbeki and his people, and then moving in President Zuma and his people. But it was really the outcome of a court case in Pietermaritzburg by Judge Nicholson, who made inferences that President Mbeki and the cabinet had colluded with the prosecuting authority that I think angered the ANC National Executive, and then a decision was taken to recall him. But also what must be clear is that that happened within the Constitution of South Africa. There was no law that was broken. What happened there was that President Mbeki was approached as a member of the ANC to say that he had to step down, which is provided in the Constitution, and that is exactly what happened.
Well, and there's certainly room in most political systems for jockeying for power. So, Jacques, tell us, I think the odds-on favorite, of course, for the next sort of long-term presidency is Mr. Zuma. And ideologically, how does he compare to President Mbeki? I mean, what are the differences?
It's, I definitely would say that Mbeki, I never met him, So I cannot speak on a first-hand account, but on those that I've spoken with that have met him and that have known him, and what has been reported in the press is Mbeki didn't seem to be as connected to the people as they would have liked. People didn't feel they had a rapport with him. And many people said he follows his own head no matter who says what. And so I think that might have been a deep-seated start, that people did not feel connected to him. Certain elements in the party felt that they weren't heard. Zuma, on the other hand, has got a very populist approach. He immediately connects to people, and I've heard that across the board, where people said they feel the man's listening to you. And I think that might have been, you know, there's definitely on a personal level, so this is not policy really that I'm talking about here. On a personal level, there's definitely that difference between the two. On policy level, Zuma's in a tight spot. One press coverage, you know, was rather harsh on him and said he's a chameleon, that he changes his color depending who he's talking to. I don't necessarily take that to be negative. It could be that he verbalizes people's interests and concerns very well, and so people feel heard, and that's why they feel heard. But now if he verbalizes that for everybody, does it imply a commitment from his side, as a question? So he definitely has made a great impression on many, that they feel they heard. But the big question is, he had great support from COSATU and the Communist Party, and they have a vested interest, and they feel to this day that the country is not moving in the direction they would like to. And so Zuma has to address their concerns, yet traditionally those concerns often, you know, you always question how it will impact the economy. And Zuma has made a statement that the economy will go on as it has before. So he'll be up to a very interesting challenge to see how we can keep all the different constituencies happy.
Well, and Mokwining, I'm sorry, if we could move forward a bit to some of the members of the previous cabinet were not particularly happy, I think, with the change. I'm thinking of the former defense minister, Mr. Lakota, has suggested perhaps he was filing divorce papers from the ANC. And what is the possibility of the formation of a opposition party?
These are the latest developments, but the formation of a party is not what has been formally announced, only that there is some dissatisfaction that has been expressed, especially by the former chairperson, Minister Lakota, who was a minister in President Mbeki's cabinet. This really is coming within the context that there is now a new leadership that has taken over, and that the people who are in the leadership feel that they are now marginalized and no longer part of the decision. And the recall of President Mbeki is the one issue that they felt that it was not handled properly. But because they are no longer members of the National Executive, having lost in the national conference in December, they could not engage and debate on that issue. They just had to accept that. Will there be a formation of a party? I think it's something that people are looking at. I think today former Minister Lakota was going to meet with the Treasurer General that was in the news to resolve the matter. From the ANC side, they still feel that those people, those members of the ANC who are disgruntled, who are leaders, can still be discussed. Issues that they raise can still be discussed. But I think only time will tell whether there will be a new party that is formed. I think it will depend mainly on whether the two groups can find each other. If that happens, I think there won't be any party. But I must say that the people seem very, very disgruntled and not happy with how the ANC is going.
Well, we've got just about a minute left. New party or not, what do you think the challenges for the next president will be?
I think President Motlanthe, who's now the interim president, I read something really interesting just a week ago about him, said he's a very stable, solid leader and kind of between the two. And they say, you know, a week is a very long thing in politics. And there is a possibility that when it comes to electing the new president, that he would be a viable candidate himself. And people might look at him as not one or the other, but something in between and a unifying factor. So that's another interesting thing that might happen.
Well, that's another election for us to watch after we finish our business here in this country. Jacques du Plesis and Mokwining Nhlapo, thank you very much. To our viewers, we'll see you next time on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,